When it comes to immigration and population policy, the other parties are like drunken fools pouring petrol onto a bonfire. Unless we put a stop to this madness, it is going to blow up in our faces. It is time for the adults in the room to speak up and call them out, because otherwise the idiots with the petrol can are going to burn the economy to the ground. Of course, it is difficult for anyone to question the level of immigration without being called a racist, because it has always been seen as a legitimate tactic to label anyone a racist when they propose policy that others do not like. The racist card has been pulled out so many times in respect of policies I propose that it is fraying around the edges from the grubby little hands that hold it. I am, of course, talking about the Australian Greens and Labor. Both major political parties believe more is better when it comes to immigration, with the result that voters have up until now been given no choice on the level of immigration or population size. In 1994, Barry Jones, a Labor Member of Parliament, conducted an inquiry into Australia's population carrying capacity, and his committee recommended the year-by-year decisions on immigration should not be taken in an ad hoc fashion without realising the incremental downstream effects. 2 years later, I made my maiden speech. I warned the Parliament about high rate of immigration. This warning was timely because the Commonwealth Bank in a recent study found immigration is papering over Australia's economic weakness, which is that per capita GDP has been falling since 1990. The Commonwealth Bank recommends a reduction in immigration so that jobs are soaked up by the existing pool of unemployed and underemployed. I agree. In 1997, Barry Jones admitted Labor uses immigration to gain political capital, by which he meant Labor uses immigration to lock up political votes for the future, and nothing has changed. I refer to what Barry Jones had said at that time, and he admitted that they only used them to bring in people from certain countries purely for the vote. They knew it would create social incohesion in our country. Yet here I am again, 21 years after my first maiden speech, warning parliamentarians about the high rate of immigration. We reached a tipping point in 1990 because it was is the year our standard of living began decreasing because of excessive level of immigration. One Nation believes in 70,000 to 80,000 migrants a year and a stable population. Who benefits from high levels of immigration? Both major parties use immigration to buy votes for the future, but these parties are also hostages to big business. I include our universities in the definition of big business because they set aside more than 250,000 places for international students. The government will say these students cross-subsidise Australian students, and I say rubbish. Last year, the government granted 343,035 international student visas, and most of these visas carried work rights of 40 hours a fortnight in term time and unlimited work rights in other times. On Tuesday this week, the Senate agreed with me. It is a matter of urgency that we understand the number of jobs taken by international students, because international students on temporary visas take lower paid jobs that could be done by unemployed young Australians. I would remind the Senate that 37.5% of young Australians aged 15 to 24 are unemployed, and many of them are located in the same locations as our universities. International students are good for the remuneration packages of University Vice-Chancellor and those who invest in student housing, but bad for unemployed young people and others who find their wages and conditions depressed by hundreds of thousands of international students with automatic rights to work in Australia. But not only are they have rights to work in Australia, we find that after they have done their degrees here in Australia, a lot of them stay on to work. It is quite often that I might get into a taxi in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane and find that they did their university degrees here, have gone on to actually become taxi drivers. Have we actually really opened up our universities for these people to get their degrees to go back to their own countries, or have they used our universities as a backdoor to get into the country? Because then it allows them the right to get permanent residency here and then to move on to citizenship. Or should we say, no, you get your degree, then you go back to your country, then from your country you apply, like everyone else, for immigration to migrate to Australia? The unemployed have no friends in the Labor Party because this week Labor strongly defended the rights of international students to work here in Australia. A 2015 Deloitte Access economic study for the government revealed 95% of international students live and study in our big cities, where we are already experiencing most of the population growth. In the 2016-17 financial year, the government granted over 343,000 international student visas with work rights, over 200,000 permanent visas, over 87,000 four-year temporary skilled visas. That is over 630,000 people coming into the country every year on these visa categories. It is pure madness. The government is on steroids. Australians don't want it. These numbers are driving the largest per capita immigration program in the world. It is a social experiment on an unprecedented scale, and no one knows how it will end. It's a population Ponzi scheme. A bigger population means more demand for more goods and services, which in turn increases an economic measurement called gross domestic product, or GDP. The government says that our growing GDP is a sign of their good economic management, but these figures are inflated, but export sales of our gas, even though these revenues do not contribute to the income or welfare of Australians. The only Australians to benefit from the export of our gas are the small number of people directly employed in the industry and those who own shares in Chevron, BP, Shell and ExxonMobil, because these companies don't pay tax in Australia. One Nation is shocked that neither major political party is willing to address the overly generous taxation regime which sees Australians pay foreign-owned multinationals taking our gas and never pay for it. This ridiculous situation is the result of the way oil and gas companies are allowed to treat expenses when calculating their paper profits. Next time you see your electricity or gas bill, just remember this government allows petroleum giants to claim more in expenses than they actually paid, which in effect represents a subsidy by taxpayers. Let me explain. These gas giants are able to claim 18% more than they pay for goods and services. The genuine expense plus 18% is a base amount, which is further increased year by year by 15% plus the long-term bond rate until the moment the companies earn revenue. By the time the gas cartel companies earn money on the export sales of our gas, they can call on the mountain of existing tax credits, a $250 billion mountain, to ensure they never make a profit. I would remind the Parliament that $250 million in petroleum resource rent tax credits is enough to pay nearly half of our national debt. As I go back to the article, now I'm saying that GDP, in an article that was put out, Population Growth Masking Australia's Economic Weakness. Now this was put out on the 12th of July 2017, and it was by Michael Jander. And it basically says that a report by the Commonwealth Bank senior economist Gareth Arad has found that Australia's high immigration intake is papering over economic weakness in headline figures. That per capita measures of the economic suggest that growth in living standards has stagnated and for some sections of the resident population, and particularly younger people, it has gone backwards. He also pointed out that Australia has one of the highest population growth rates among developed economies, more than half of which is due to net immigration. However, while this makes Australia's headline economic growth rate look reasonable on a per capita basis, GDP growth has been trending downwards since the recovery from Australia's last recession in the early 1990s. Most Australians will tell you that they are feeling the pinch of high immigration in our country. I want the Australian economy to grow for the right reason, which is growth because of increased productivity. As it stands, our economy is growing for the wrong reason, growth because of increased population. I wonder how many Australians have made the connection between high energy prices and high immigration. Every new international student or permanent migrant requires essential services like housing and electricity. Excessive demand causes prices to go up. Very soon we will see council and water rates increase rapidly to reflect the increased cost of water, access to sewage networks and places to dispose of rubbish. Services we take for granted, services we call essential, will take an increasing proportion of our income and crowd out the ability to pay for other things. This is what I call a fall in the standard of living, a smaller slice of the economic cake. Despite the fact living standards are dropping, we continue with our high level of immigration, consequently increasing our population through naturalised citizenship. Australians have been surveyed often over the past 30 years, and every time respondents say that the population growth is too high. But of course governments, both Liberal and Labor, believe they know what is best for the uninformed voter. Recently, the October Fairfax Reach poll found two-thirds of Australians thought the population growth was too high. What Australians are really saying is that they want lower levels of immigration because 60% of our population growth now comes from immigration. I believe Australians have a right to decide the pattern and number of migrants they take in, and they have a right to say what is in the national interest. Australians are feeling this in their cities, mainly in the capital cities. They have to put up with road congestion, they have increased costs in housing, services, they line up for, if they want to go to the hospitals or doctors, they can't see specialists. There's a waiting period of even 12 months to see a specialist in this country. This is where our standard of living has dropped. And yet we don't have a debate about this, and the people have nowhere to turn to get our politicians to listen to what is happening. It's all right for people in this House. We have a very good income. We have a standard of living. We have a lifestyle that many Australians will never ever know what it's like to be in our shoes. But I feel for the struggling people of this nation and the younger generations that are coming through with no hope of a job or a long-term position. They're underemployed. And that's why with high immigration too, it's caused, and this is why we have casualisation, this is why real wages have not increased over a period of time. We have too many people coming into this country, and it is only going to get worse. We are now in over $500 billion debt in this country. How are we going to pay it off? We can't provide the services for the people here. With increasing population, we are one of the driest nations in this world. Yet we are not providing the water resources that we need. How many dams have we built? Where is the water coming from? And the answer to that is, well, look, we've got a water shortage, so let's keep increasing the prices. So we're telling people we don't have the water, but you're going to pay for it. And that's what we're doing to our farming sector. And the amount that we're charging them, it's all right for foreigners and everyone else to own our water rights in this country, but it's not all right for the farmers to have use of water when they need it to grow the food that will eventually feed us. This is all due to high immigration, and we have to look at this sensibly. What sort of country do we want? What do we expect in the future? Or are we just going to just be here for a number of years that we are here and passing legislation without the true vision of seeing what this country is going to be like further down the track? Or are we just going to pass it on to the next people? That's your problem, that's your responsibility, that's not mine. I'm out of here. That's not the way to deal with this. And this has been the big issue. And when I raised in the early 90s, when I was in this parliament first off, we had high immigration, around about 150,000 a year then. And the then Prime Minister John Howard realised that what the people wanted, and he knew the impact it was having on our country, and he reduced the numbers. And it was a sensible move. But now it has increased time and time again to now the factors of bringing in approximately 600,000+ people a year into this country. We can't sustain this and maintain our standard of living that we have today and ensure that we are handing on a strong country for future generations. And not only our immigration, I'm going to touch on the fact that our free trade agreements, which is actually going to open up the borders for these countries to bring in the people here into Australia. There's no limit to it. These are things that our government is doing behind the scenes that the people, the general populace, doesn't understand. And I feel for these workers. They live in cities, they've grown up in these towns, in these suburbs, and they have actually, they want to stay there, but they can't. They're being forced out. Not only the high immigration, but by foreign ownership. People who are not supposed to be buying established housing in this country, everyone seems to turn a blind eye to it. Councillors, governments, federal government, the Treasurer. How many have we reined in? We know that we have so many people from other countries buying up our established housing. It is against our laws, but who really looks at it? Who really wants to do anything? They don't want to do it. I tell you why, because these state governments are pulling in so much revenue from stamp duty from these people without regards to the Australian people, because supply and demand. You've got more people coming in here buying up investment properties, foreign ownership. It is driving up the demand where Australians can't buy those houses. They're forced out of there. The suburbs that they grew up in, where they're around their families, and we're forcing them out of their own cities, out of their own towns. And the attitude is the government, oh well, go out west, go out to rural and regional Australia. There's plenty of housing there. Yes, there is. But those areas for people who want that lifestyle. But we are forcing people there. And if you're not a lover of the land and want to be there in that environment, well, then you shouldn't have to be forced out there. But we're just opening up our borders. And I feel for the people, as I said, when people in these cities actually have to get in the cars and drive an hour plus maybe 2 hours to get to work, or if they want to catch a train, if there's a train, and then they're stuck on the trains for ages, and then our infrastructure, whether it be trains or buses, whatever, we can't provide that as well. It's just everything is impacting. And what we are doing is propping up big business in this country. Oh, they want high immigration. Bring them in. You know why? Because they sell more white goods and product. They're making more profits to put into their own hip pockets. But a lot of these companies now are also foreign-owned, so we don't get the profits here. Those profits go overseas. And it's at the expense of the Australian people. As I said, yesterday the citizenship that was withdrawn, and I'm disgusted with that as well, because what is happening here, we're allowing people in this country, the Labor and the Greens have no respect for what it is to be an Australian. For someone to come in here and only be in this country for 1 year, and then they can go for their citizenship. Where's their allegiance to this country? Why are we the lowest one of the Western world of anyone to get their citizenship in this country? Where is the allegiance that we demand of them? What is wrong with someone waiting 4 years, as the government wants, but I believe 8 years, to prove their allegiance to this country? Let's start being Australians and look after our country first.
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Your time's expired. Senator Fierravanti.